In this video, we're going to be breaking down the different types of container elements you can add to your visual designs. You can find your containers over here on the left-hand side, and there's a few of them because they offer different types of appearance properties and even data capabilities. So we're going to go through and break each of them down so you understand which one's going to be the most appropriate for you. Now, a container is really just an element that can be the parent of another element. So here's a very quick example. This white group that we see here, this is the regular group container. This is actually going to be the most common type of container you'll use throughout your application. And with responsive settings, you really want to leverage containers in general, but specifically the regular group, because that's really where all of the responsive layout settings begin, is that these containers dictate how the elements inside of them are going to be positioned. And with combining multiple containers on your page, you're now creating layouts on your screen. Okay, so in this group, I have two buttons, right? These buttons live inside of the group. I can even see that in my elements tree. This group is called group with buttons. So here it is, and Bubble is showing me that this is an item that has other elements nested inside of it with this plus icon. So I can click on that. It'll open it up and show me indented that I have those two buttons there. If I pick up this group, move it around, you can see that everything moves as a unit. They are organized together within that one container. Now, you can nest elements, containers within other containers. So for example, I can grab another group and put it inside here. Let me just make sure that this has some dimensions. Let's do like a 100 by 100 group, right? So there's that group inside of the first group. Okay, I'm going to give it a quick background color so that we can see it right there. Okay, and I can continue nesting. I can put the buttons inside of the inner group. I can put more groups inside of this. Now, as a quick note, not all containers can be nested inside of something else. I'm going to go through each of them so you understand what the rules are, but just be mindful of that, okay? We'll touch on the specifics in a moment. So let's go through them so you understand what the differences are. Now, like I said, this group container, the regular one, is going to be your most commonly used container. You have appearance properties that you can change here. So you can give these groups background colors, borders, roundness around the corners, shadows, all of that, just like you can with most of your visual elements, your text and your buttons. And a group is actually a great way to create a background to something. What I often see happening for new Bubble users is that they will layer elements on top of a shape because a shape is essentially just a solid block of color. However, that really can interfere with responsive behavior. What would be better for performance and for design and just cleanliness and consistency is grouping your elements together and then creating the backgrounds at the group level. You can have a color, a gradient, or even an image for the background of that group. Now, your groups don't even have to be visible to the user. I've chosen to do that here so we can see clearly where that element is, but your group containers can simply be a way for you to organize your designs on the page, and your users don't necessarily need to be aware of all of those boundaries. So I can make this group transparent for the user. I can set it to have no background style, no border colors, and that's what it will look like for the user. They're just going to see these two buttons floating there. And it just depends on your design. That might be exactly what you're looking for. Again, the user doesn't need to be aware of everything. I'm going to undo this so that we can bring that group appearance back. The next container we're going to look at is the repeating group. That's this one right here. So I've got an example design set up with a repeating group right here. Repeating groups are specifically for working with lists. Okay, and these lists can come from multiple data sources. They can come from your database, they can come from a plugin, an API connection, they can even be custom state values. We're actually going to dive in deeper into the mechanics of a repeating group in a separate video, so make sure to watch that to learn more about how to put it together and all the different properties available. But for now, you just need to know that this container is specifically for working with lists and that it needs to have a data source in order to display. Okay, so a repeating group is made up of cells. If I wanted to see a list of users, I'm going to tell the repeating group which users I want to see, and for every user, a new cell will be generated. Okay, and we can see in my preview over here, this is my repeating group. I've got my 6 users from my database, And so we have 6 different cells. Now, cells can be designed in any combination of rows and columns. What I have here right now is one column with however many rows are needed to display my full data source. Okay, so in this case, I have 6 users coming from my database. That's what I've defined over here. Again, don't worry about this part too much. We'll get into this in a separate video. But I've told Bubble which users to go find. And so Bubble's going to generate a certain number of rows to match that data source so that I can see everybody here. And I've got it in one column. Now I can change my row and column structure so that things are fixed or dynamic. I can create a second column so that I see maybe 3 on the left, 3 on the right. For that, this kind of appearance properties, these will allow you to create spreadsheet type of designs, tables. Really, anytime you're working with a list of something, this is going to be the element to use to display all of that information dynamically. So I'm not actually having to create multiple independent groups like I had up here for every user in my database, because that is an unknown number, right? Over time, I might have hundreds, I might have thousands. I want the repeating group to generate all that stuff dynamically for me. And so all I have to do is design what I want the cell to look like just in this first cell here, right? So anything I do inside of this cell, I'm going to just copy this text and paste it, right? So I've added another text. You see how it repeats? And it will duplicate that for me. And whatever that cell's data source is specifically, right? So we have user 1, user 2, user 3. It will show that information for me. And that way we see different users. Again, don't worry so much about the expressions that we're using here. These are dynamic expressions. We'll go over that in separate videos. But this is the concept around the repeating group, is that you are designing one cell and it will repeat. And as you may notice here, let me go over to the hierarchy real quick. You can group other containers inside of the cell. So first I have a parent container. I have called it group with RG. It's abbreviated for repeating group. That's this one right here, this big rectangle with the border color. And inside of that group is my repeating group. Okay, and inside of that repeating group is another group, and that's the one with the white background. I've got a little bit of padding inside there. And inside of that group, I have my content, the image, the text, and the text. Okay, so the reason I put a group inside of the repeating group cell is so that I could have a background color within the cell, and I can create this kind of card design. Repeating group cells themselves, you can't control the background color there. You can control the overall repeating group background, right? So if I gave the repeating group itself a background color of, let's say, just this blue purple color, it's going to color everything. But if you put a group inside of the cell, so I'm going to remove this, like I've done here, then you have much more granular control over which cells are colored. For example, if I hover over my table here, maybe I can change the color. Let me actually show you that. This is a very popular type of design. And so it will evaluate cell by cell, whether it's the cell itself or it's the data source within that cell. So here I'm going to add a condition to this group that is inside of my cell. I'm going to say when this group is hovered, I'm going to change the background color to maybe like a darker gray like this. And I'll toggle this on and off so you can see what we should expect to see when we hover over the cell, right? So I'll refresh my page and we can see what this will look like. So with this group, we get a lot more granular control. We can really design this cell by cell, create different conditions, just like that, right? So imagine a table where you might have a very wide repeating group, and you need to be able to highlight your cells. Imagine these rows are maybe more compressed and you have many more things that you're seeing at one time. Allowing the user to hover over can help them keep track of where they're at and what they're looking at there. A couple other details to know about the repeating group is that you can also have a separator here. So right now I don't have one because I'm allowing my group to essentially create that separation as if each cell is a different card. But you can have a line show up between your cells and with different styles here. So I've just selected the dotted separator. So we're going to see a horizontal line show up between each of our little cards here, just like that. Okay, so that's the repeating group. It's working with a list of items. You're going to have a few specific responsive settings that are unique to the repeating group that we'll go over in a separate video involving the rows and columns and also within this layout tab as well. Let's move on to the next container, which is our pop-up. All right, so I've got a pop-up here on the page. You actually can't see it right now because a pop-up by nature is hidden by default, right? So here's my pop-up. I'm going to open this up. Now in some platforms, you might know this as a modal. Okay, this is essentially a group that is positioned above the rest of the page. So if you think about 3D space, right, your z-axis, this pop-up lives above the rest of the page. And pop-ups are great for grabbing the user's attention so that you can give them some kind of a warning message or a confirmation message, or maybe have them take a specific action before they can do anything else on the page, right? Maybe it's like a delete confirmation. Are you sure you want to delete something, right? And so they can make a decision here, and then you hide the pop-up and take them back to where they were on the page. That's what these pop-ups are really great for, and pop-ups have unique capabilities in their design and appearance, in that they can define the background as well. So the appearance of what's going on behind it, I can blur out the background. We have kind of a 2.5 setting there. If I increase that, it blurs even more, or I can remove the blur altogether. It looks like it's not updating in real time for me. There we go. Just like that. So it's removed less of the blur, or I should say it's removed more of the blur. And you can also change the gray out color, right? So maybe I want it to be red back there, or white, or darker. You can also make this fully colored so that the user can't actually see anything behind the pop-up. Maybe if this is more of like a lock screen, you have a login form or a sign-up form here before they can really do anything or see anything behind it. The pop-ups, again, by nature, are going to be hidden by default. So you have to show it with a workflow. You can't even show it in a condition. And I've got an example here with this button. So when the user clicks on this button, it's going to show the pop-up. So here's the workflow. When this button is clicked, we show the pop-up element, and then it will become visible. And I'll show you here. If I click on this button, right, there's my pop-up. You can see that you have control over the background color of the pop-up, the borders, the roundness. You can do a drop shadow. Of course, you can change the dimensions. I just created kind of this size so we can clearly see it, but your pop-ups can be bigger, they can be smaller. It's completely up to you. And of course, just like any other container, these pop-ups have, under the Layout tab, a responsive layout capability, so I can position all of my elements inside, you know, as a column, as a row, like we've gone over in previous videos about responsive. Now, closing a pop-up can also happen a few ways. You can simply click outside of the pop-up. So let me show you over here in the preview. I can click out and it goes away. You can also set up a workflow. So if you have like a little X icon or a close button, you can then run a workflow to trigger the action hide an element, and you'll select the pop-up. That's your element to hide. Now, in some cases, you may not want to give the user the ability to just click outside of it to close it. Again, the pop-up could be used as a lock or some kind of a required action that the user needs to take. And that's what this little checkbox is going to be helpful for. If you check this, then it will prevent them from clicking out. And the only way that they can close it is through a workflow. That way you have more control over making a close button available to them. You know, maybe they're required to fill out some form before they're able to move on, right? So that capability is there for you, so you can really customize your feature with it. All right, so that's the pop-up. The next container is our floating group. Now the floating group example that I have here is this element that's stretching across the top of my screen. A floating group essentially allows you to create kind of a sticky element. So if I go back to my page here, let me actually refresh. As I scroll up and down the page, this group will always be present. Okay, so you can see that there, that group is not going away, right? Just like the rest of, or unlike the rest of the content, you know, as I continue to scroll down, those go up on the page. Eventually I don't see it, but this top group I am seeing. This is very popular for headers, even footers, or sidebar menus, because you can set up your floating group to float relative to different sides of your page. Right now I have it floating relative to the top, technically horizontally floating relative to the left, but I do have it stretching all the way across. So, you know, whether I say left or right, it doesn't really matter. But if I change this design where the width was more narrow, right, and so it was only along kind of the left side here and then stretched all the way across the top and bottom of the page. Let's actually do that. Let's change the layout of this floating group. Let's say minimum width 200 pixels, or sorry, let's do a fixed width of 200 pixels wide, And then as far as the height, I don't want to fit it to content. I just want it to stretch all the way across the page. And so as I scroll up and down, we see this stay here on the left-hand side. That's another popular type of approach for menus, where you might have sub-menus, and dashboards are actually very popular features that have a sidebar menu. So that's really the floating group. It's just that sticky behavior where it can float relative to different sides of your page. All right, and of course you can control the styling, the colors, the borders, the shadow styles, all of the same things we've been seeing before with our other containers. I'm going to bring this back to where it was. All right, and our final container is the group focus. The group focus is actually quite similar to a pop-up. It doesn't take over the entire screen with the blur out of the background, but it is an element that is hidden by default and has to be shown in a workflow, and it also kind of floats above the rest of the page. In fact, these last three containers, your pop-up, floating group, and group focus, these elements float above the rest of the content on the page. And because of that distinction, because of that characteristic, you cannot nest these three types of containers inside of any other container. They are their own thing, right? You cannot put a pop-up inside of a group because a pop-up lives above the group elements. You cannot put a pop-up inside another pop-up, right? You cannot put a pop-up inside of a floating group, and vice versa. You cannot put floating groups inside pop-ups or floating groups inside group focus. These three cannot be nested at all. The groups and repeating groups can be nested inside any of the other containers. Groups can go inside groups can go inside repeating groups can go inside groups. Any mix and match combination you can think of, that's fine for the first two, but not for these last three. All right, so back to our group focus. I've got an example here. I'm gonna have to show it here by turning it on in my elements tree, because again, this is another one where it's shown in a workflow. So here for the categories button, when I click on that, it's going to show that group focus. Okay, and I'll show you here if I click on group focus there. Now this is the thing about group focus. If I click anywhere outside the group focus, just like a pop-up, it will close automatically. But it has to be shown with the workflow, right? Just like a pop-up. The difference between the pop-up is that the group focus is kind of linked to another element. Okay, so if we go to this group focus here, we can see that it's linked to button categories. Let me actually switch it out because Bubble's not displaying it that way. Let me switch it to go link to the repeating group. Now let me bring it back to the categories. There we go. Okay, so it has a reference element, and I can offset that reference by, changing my pixel count here. So if I say maybe 20 pixels offset from the top, it moves it down a little bit. If I don't want it fully touching that categories button, I can also offset, left or right. We can do negative numbers here to move in the other direction, right? So I'm going to leave it back to 0. Again, we have all the same appearance properties, color, the background colors, borders, shadows, all of that. Group focus elements are typically seen when you want to create or you want to have some sort of a hidden additional information like a tooltip or help information for the user, or you simply want to hide some content that doesn't need to be displayed all the time. So consider this categories button being like a primary menu, and in order for the user to see all the submenu items, they have to click on this button. Right, and so now we see this is pulling actually from, this is a repeating group inside of my group focus, pulling from my categories option set. And from here, I can have other buttons, I can navigate the user to other places, I can trigger workflows, it's whatever I want to do. But the way that I've designed this display of these categories is inside of a repeating group that lives inside the group focus, which is not always visible, right? I have to show this here and then I can click out. You can, of course, close the group focus with a workflow inside of the group focus, with it like an X icon or a button just to create even more clarity for your user, but it's not necessary. Group focus elements cannot be locked like a pop-up can with that prevent from closing. It's always going to close whenever you click outside of it. Right, so imagine, like a help icon where you need to give your users some tool tips. This is a great use case for group focus elements, and you can change the dimensions. It doesn't have to be this big. It can be a lot smaller. It can be a lot bigger. The last thing that I'll go over here with these containers is, let me close this over here, is that they all offer a data source capability. We'll touch on this a bit more when we work with data and passing data around, but you may have noticed that with all these containers, we have the ability to set a type of content and a data source. Now, for all of the containers except the repeating group, your data source is going to be a single value. Maybe it's a user, a company, a text, a number, a date, some record in your database. It's going to work with a single value. It essentially allows you to create a shortcut to a specific record. Let's say for this group, I set my type of content to company, and my data source is the current user's company. What this allows me to do is now display things inside of the group, okay, that pulls from that company. So I can show the now parent group's company's name, right? If the data source of this group is pointing to a company record, then whatever that company record is, I can display information from that company. You can also change the data source via workflows, right? It doesn't have to be fixed to whatever I've defined here. This is just the default data source. In fact, I can leave the default data source blank and have other functionality on the page to change the data source via a workflow. I can say, I want to see my company. Now I want to see this other person's company or somebody else's company. And as the data source changes, it will reflect in the internal dynamic expressions here to show different content as the data source changes. So all of these containers can act as data sources. They don't have to, but they can. The repeating group is the only one where the data source has to be a list value. So here I've set it up to search for users, and so the data source is a list of users. All right, so those are our container elements. You want to leverage these as much as possible because, again, they do dictate your responsive layouts designs, especially this group element. That's going to be your most commonly used one. There are plugins that you can install to add more containers with different types of behavior properties. The one that's the most popular that gets added quite frequently, depending on the application, but it is kind of the next one that I typically see getting added, is Bubble's own plugin for drag and drop groups. So they're essentially regular groups, but they have a drag and drop capability. It actually comes with two different types of elements. A draggable group, where the user can pick up a group and move it around on the screen, and then a drop zone type of group. So I can pick something up and drop it on that drop zone, and then you can trigger a workflow. You can do whatever you want from there. So an example of that would be like a Trello board type of design, where you're moving cards around, you're picking them up, and you're changing kind of what list they're in. Another example would be your email. Think of, selecting emails or picking one up and dragging it over to a trash can icon to delete it. So that plugin introduces two new types of containers because at the end of the day, they're still visual elements that can be the parent of one or more other elements, but they have their own kind of special properties for appearance and functionality, data sources, things like that. All right, everyone, I encourage you to create containers on your group, on your page, and get comfortable with the settings and really understand how you can leverage these as much as possible. Again, you can design these in a number of ways so that they are present for the user, they're visible, or maybe they're even transparent. All right, we'll see you in the next video.